What is going on, everybody? Today we are doing a 7-round mock draft. The first one on this channel. We're going to hit a lot of the different teams, but we're going to jump right into it, and we're going to start with the Las Vegas Raiders. We're going to talk through this. I'm going to give you guys my thoughts and opinions. I want to talk about which guys I think should be picked, why. Hopefully PFF's mock draft simulator is realistic. Hopefully, they don't leave guys like Bryce Young and some of these other guys on the board at pick 7. Obviously, they didn't. Believe it or not, I was on Pro Football Network's mock draft simulator, and they had Jalen Carter available at pick 7. So the second that happened, I decided to go ahead and close that out. Restart with Pro Football Focus. Looks good so far. Jalen Carter goes 1. Bryce Young goes 2. The Arizona Cardinals take Tyree Wilson, which is kind of interesting. I could see it happening, right? Definitely could see that happening over Will Anderson, who will go 5. CJ Stroud goes 4 to the Colts, as you guys can see. The Raiders are on the clock, and it's kind of interesting because CJ Stroud and Bryce Young are gone, and those are the 2 quarterbacks that I would have taken if I'm the Raiders. And at pick 7, what do you do? What do you do if you're the Raiders? You can get Will Levis, and you can get a quarterback of the future, or at least a guy you think could be the future, or you can go with the defensive player, a guy that could actually have an impact on the defensive side for the Raiders. What do you do? Personally, I'm going to go with the defensive player. Now, there's some interesting guys to be had. Now, some people are going to take Will Levis right now, and let me just explain why I'm not going to take Will Levis. First and foremost, I think he could be a good quarterback, but I think the Raiders have bigger issues right now on the defensive side than the quarterback position. And I say that understanding that there's probably a guy the Raiders are going to bring in. Rather, it's Trey Lance, Jimmy Garoppolo, maybe Tom Brady comes back. Maybe it's Jarrett Stidham, right? Maybe Stidham gets that offseason to improve and take that next step next year. You build an offense around him. You have all the weapons on the offensive side. I don't think a quarterback matters as much when you got the weapons, right? We kind of see that with the San Francisco 49ers, how their defense kind of carries them because they have so many weapons on the offensive side, and the quarterback really just executes the coach's offense. I don't see why the Raiders couldn't do that either. Now, of course, Will Levis, it does give you that opportunity, right, potentially, to come in and be the quarterback, but the Raiders have needs. So for me, I'm taking the best cornerback available on the best cornerback available on the board, as well as, in my opinion, the best defensive player available at this pick. And that's obviously Devon Witherspoon out of Illinois. I think Witherspoon is a difference maker. I've watched tape of about 4 of the top cornerbacks, and initially I didn't have Witherspoon on the board. I didn't have him up there. To me, I said that I think the Raiders should arguably go get one of the other cornerbacks, Joey Porter, a couple other guys. And when I watched Witherspoon's tape, I said, damn, this guy is good. This guy's a difference maker. This guy actually has an impact that you can see, and I think he's the sure corner in this class. And I don't think a lot of these other guys are the sure corners. So do as you would like with that. Let's go ahead and jump into the second pick. You got pick 38. Again, we didn't take a quarterback. We went ahead and took a cornerback. And this one's interesting because a guy who I love, a lot of you guys know, is Darnell Wright. And he would be a day 1 starter for the Raiders. But I personally think Jermaine Illuminor is a good right tackle. In fact, after week 2, he gave up 1 sack the rest of the season. And he pretty much started every single game. He even flipped from right tackle to right guard in week 3 or 4. He flipped to left tackle when Colton Miller was out. And he pretty much shut it down pretty much the entire season. And in my opinion, yes, Darnell Wright would come in day 1 and start. But with the 38th overall pick, could you have someone else on the board that may have a bigger impact? And I think there is a guy. In my opinion, for the Raiders, you're taking Siaki Ika out of Baylor. 6'4", 350 plus pounds. This guy is a freaking beast, man. I watched this tape just recently where I actually watched 3 or 4 different games. And you don't see him all that much even out there because Baylor was rotating their defensive linemen a lot. He didn't play a lot. He played primarily on run downs. which I think was a mistake by Baylor. Because even on pass downs where he was in, or on passing plays in which it was first or second down, the guy crushed people. He would take his center or guard and he'd take him back into the quarterback. And for me, that type of impact, 6'5", 350 plus, you don't get a lot of these guys that can move the way this Baylor interior defensive tackle can. And the Raiders have a major need at that position as well. I think it makes all too much sense. Of course, the Raiders could go out and do a couple different things if they really wanted to with that pick. You could get a right tackle. You could save the cap that Jermaine Illuminor may get. But for me, I'm going forward with it. Here's an interesting pick. Pick 70, third round. There is a guy on the board that I absolutely like. I shouldn't say I love him, right? That would be the wrong thing for me. Matthew Bergerian, I think, is a good football player. We'll just kind of look through the board of some of the guys that are available. Benton is another player that I like, having a great Senior Bowl right now. You got a couple other guys, a couple tight ends, a couple running backs. Rasheed Rice is still there as well at SMU. Couple of linebackers as well. So let's actually go ahead and look at it positionally. Right now, I think one of the things the Raiders could use is an interior offensive lineman. And at this point in the third round, I think this is a good spot to take an interior offensive lineman. Keep in mind, this is not a backup guy that you're developing long term. This is the 70th pick in this draft. This is the 70th best player coming out of this class. I don't think this draft has a lot of super high-end talent where we know these guys are sure things at the top. But what it has is a lot of guys in the middle that are long-term starters in the NFL. And there's a couple of good options for the Raiders. Steve Avila, great guard. Andrew Voorhees, another really good guard. Cedric Van Pren, although I think he went back to school, they still have him listed here. Something PFF needs to get fixed. Jarrett Patterson, also at the Senior Bowl. Having a pretty good Senior Bowl. A couple other guys as well. You guys can kind of go down the list. There's guys that you can probably get a little bit later on as well if you really wanted to wait. But I don't want to wait. I want to get the day one starter today. And I don't know if these guys will be available on the next pick, right? So we got pick 70 right now. And then we don't pick for 39 more picks. So some of these guys could potentially be gone. It's a very interesting class to pick between. I know some people are going to take Steve Avila. I'm going to take Andrew Voorhees. I think Andrew Voorhees is a guy whose tape that I've watched, and I think this guy is it. I think this guy has the potential to become a really, really, really good football player. I think he's like 6'5", so he's super tall. He hasn't fully developed, right? He's going to get much stronger. And in my opinion, he fits the power scheme really well, right? And don't get me wrong. I don't think Steve Avila is a bad football player. You can take either one and be perfect. Even if you wanted a center, I'm going to be honest, Luke Wilper at Ohio State is the best center in this class, in my opinion. I know some people love the Minnesota guy. I love him. And if the Raiders took him to replace Andre James, I'm all for that as well. But I think right guard is a bigger issue for the Raiders. I'm taking Andrew Voorhees, plus he has a badass last name. I think he's going to be a really good football player. I posted some clips of him on my Twitter. So if you guys don't follow me on Twitter, go check it out. I think he's going to be a really, really, really good football player. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump forward. I actually do want you guys to, I'm going to see if there's a way here where we can look at the guys that we took. I don't see that there is a way. We know who we took. All right, let's go ahead and get into the next player here. What else could the Raiders use, right? I would argue the Raiders do need some speed, but I don't know if there's a guy here available that could provide that, right? A couple guys that have looked good. You got the Princeton wide receiver, Andre Levis. I don't know how to say his last name specifically. You got Marvin Mims. Couple of good wide receivers. I'm going to hold off on a receiver. You can look at the tight ends. Got a couple good tight ends. I don't think the Raiders need a tight end either. You can even look at the quarterback. Some people would even argue maybe the Raiders get one of these quarterbacks. Jaron High out of BYU, I believe he's at the Senior Bowl. Dorian Thompson Robinson, I believe he was at the East-West Shrine game, which just happened, or not the game, but at practice. Max Duggan is available. I think it would be wrong for the Raiders to take a quarterback at this point. I think you could get a safety if you really wanted to. I don't know if any of these guys make sense at the moment. Let's just look at the top of the board. You got a couple of good running backs, got a couple of good edge players. You could take another defensive lineman, although I don't think it makes sense at this point to take another defensive lineman. You could take a guard, but I don't think back-to-back guards make a ton of sense, and I don't think that's realistic either, to be honest. There's a center available, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, we have Dylan Parham, who may take over at the center position. We have Andre James, who's currently starting and is locked into his contract, at least through this year. I don't think that makes a lot of sense either, although it is something that I would consider if I'm the Raiders. But I do like Keandre Miller out of TCU. Very explosive football player, had a good career at TCU. Obviously, he didn't play in that final national championship game. And I think for the Raiders, you got to look to replace Josh Jacobs, right? I say this also keeping this in mind that Josh Jacobs may sign a long-term contract, but there's also that possibility he doesn't. There's also a possibility we franchise tag him for 1 year, and then we hand it over to whoever that may be. Maybe it's Britton Brown, maybe it's Zamir White, maybe it's Sincere McCormick, or whoever else they may have available or potentially bring back. So there's definitely guys to be had, but I think the TCU running back also gives the Raiders another explosive player. Again, I don't know if Britton Brown's ever going to work out. We'll see what ends up happening. We'll see if he actually gets to play this year. But I think never having too many running backs, that to you're picking one, 109 picks in. At that point, I don't think you can have too many running backs, right? You have a couple of guys competing. We'll see what ends up happening with Josh Jacobs, right? But I do like Miller. I think he's a good football player. At this point, should the Raiders take a quarterback, right? A developmental quarterback. Some people love the Fresno State quarterback, and if he's there at this pick, I believe we're in round 5, why not pull the trigger on it, right? Why not get a guy you can develop, especially since we're not drafting a quarterback? Most likely what's going to happen if Jared Stidham's not the guy for this year, right? Let's say the Raiders go get Aaron Rodgers or Jimmy Garoppolo or Jacoby Brissett, right, who, keep in mind, has some ties to Josh McDaniels. At that point, you need a long-term development, right? For me, Jake Haener makes a lot of sense out of Fresno State. He's a gunslinger, right? He's one of those guys that definitely has the upside. Some people have compared him to Brock Purdy, although I probably wouldn't make that comparison. He is a guy that has a lot of upside, right? So here we are, pick 174. We pick 174, and then we pick again 10 picks later. We can go down the class. I think there are some guys to be had at this point. Specifically, and keep this in mind, this is at the point where you start getting some of these deeper prospects, some of these guys that have long-term development potential. At the defensive lines, not a lot of guys that I would say that I would potentially draft at this pick. One of the things I would love for the Raiders to start considering, and a team that's done this is the Philadelphia Eagles. They've done this recently, even years back. They took a 7th-round flyer on a tackle, and that tackle ended up being their starting tackle. Like, they took a 1st-round tackle 3 years ago, and he got beat out by this 7th-round guy they took like 6 years ago. I would love for the Raiders to start looking at trying to do that, right? Look for the long-term Colton Miller replacement. Look for the long-term Jermaine Illuminor replacement, right? The developmental piece. A guy that I absolutely love, and I don't even know if he's going to be available in the 5th round. I think he's going to go much higher, is going to be Carter Warren out of Pitt. In my opinion, I think Carter Warren is going to be one of those guys that in 4 to 5 years definitely has a shot to be a long-term starter for a team. And it may not even be 4 or 5 years. It could be in 2 years he's ready to go, right? I could see, and keep this in mind, last year we saw guys like Braxton Jones come out of, I forget where he came out. I think it was Utah. He came out of Utah, and he ended up starting for the Bears day 1, and he was their tackle the entire year. Abraham Lucas, 3rd-round pick, starter for the Seahawks the entire year. Nicholas Petit for the Tennessee Titans. I believe he was a 3rd-round pick as well. Starter the entire year. right? The Colts, they took a tackle, I think, late in the third round. Starter for most of the year. There's guys to be had, and I think that stays true for this class as well. Um, it's going to be an interesting draft, man. I think there's so many interesting picks. There's so many guys that the Raiders could get. Tackles, guards, right? Centers. I think the Raiders need to come up with at least 2 to 4 offensive linemen, not just through the draft, but the draft and free agency. Like, we need to have guys on the practice squad, at least 2 rookies, and we need at least 2 rookies on the active roster, right? Because we need Josh McDaniels to start developing his guys, right? We need to make sure we have these guys. With the 6th round picks, pick 7, 6th round, I would love for the Raiders to take another interior defensive lineman or a edge player. So let's look at some interior guys and some edge guys. Some interesting guys that you can get. DJ Johnson, been watching him at the Senior Bowl. He's kind of an interesting prospect. Nick Hampton, watched him a little bit at App State. Interesting prospect. You got some Ohio State guys. One of the things that happens with a lot of these big schools is they're so deep, right? Like Ohio State as an example. Taron Vincent doesn't play a lot, right? DJ Dill out of Alabama doesn't play a lot. So it's going to be kind of interesting. With this pick, I'm going to go ahead and take Ali Gay. I think he's a really, really, really good player. Not good player in that aspect, but I think he has potential to become a good player. He has length, and for a defensive end, I think that's always a positive thing to have. He has good, quick feet. I think it's a good pick to have, especially this late. A couple of interesting players. Curtis McClendon, I think he's at the Senior Bowl as well. Some tight ends, some interior guys, some receivers. Definitely interesting. It's crazy because this tackle here from Florida, Richard, I don't know how to say his last name. I think it's Gorage. I think that's how you say it. I've watched his tape and he looks pretty good. Like, to me, I would arguably take this guy in like the second or third round. He looks pretty explosive, pretty quick. I think he is on the smaller side. I think he's like 6'4", 6'5". I think he's 6'4". Right? 6'5" is not that much smaller, but I'm taking him, man, because I think he's gonna end up starting. And for us, round 6 or 7. What would the Raiders need at this point? I don't think we took a linebacker. So let's, with one of our final picks, take a linebacker. I'm going to take Jeremy Banks solely based off of, because I think this is the final pick. And he follows me on Twitter. So I'm going to take this guy, man. I don't know any of those linebackers at the end, just so you guys know. We don't get that deep into linebackers. Just so you guys know, obviously we'll see kind of how this panned out. Do understand that there's a lot of guys that, at least in my opinion, right, there's a lot of tackles and linebackers and guards that you can get in the top 4 to 5 rounds, and we watch those guys primarily, right? Like Richard Garage out of Florida, for example. I've watched his tape, right? I've watched the top 10 tackles and the top 10 interior offensive linemen. But when it comes to linebackers, right, I haven't watched all top 10. I've watched like the top 4 or 5. For linebackers, if I'm the Raiders and you want a linebacker, and let's say you trade Derek Carr for like the 16th pick with the Commanders or something like that. Well, with that 16th pick, I would take a guy like Trenton Simpson. I think he's worth that first round pick. Or at pick 38, if a guy like Drew Sanders is there out of Arkansas, I would take him, right? And of course, there's the Noah Sewells and those other guys that have upside, but I wouldn't take those guys in the top 40. That's me personally. I don't think the linebackers are very good in this class. Either way, you guys can see the grade. PFF doesn't really like my some of my selections, but to be honest, I don't really care what PFF thinks. It was interesting. I want to know what you guys think, man. What do you guys think the Raiders would do? And give me a 7-round mock draft. And if it's not 7, round that you guys want in the comments, let me know at least your top 4 or 5 picks. 4 or 5 guys that you think realistically the Raiders can get in the top 109 picks. Let me know what you guys think. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.